What's going on, everybody? Thanks again for watching this episode of Tankers Fantasy Football, where today we'll be hitting you up with the NFC South. We got a lot of guys to talk about here. We got the Panthers,
We got some Falcons,
we got the Saints,
and we got some Buccaneers.
but first, before getting into that action, we got a question.
We got
We'll
a
kick it off with
question,
headlines
kind of
here.
a headline question. We got a question coming in from Eric from Illinois talking about now that somehow Eli Rogers has been promoted to the wide receiver 3 role in Pittsburgh, what does this do to the value of Sammy Coates and Marcus Wheaton? And
I think if anything, bumps Wheaton a little, but I think this really hurts Sammy Coates. I mean, Eli's a guy that we're talking about. He missed his entire rookie year from injury. He was undrafted. This was a guy who was borderline waiver or borderline a roster bubble, trying to fight his way to the 5th receiver spot, and now he's at the 3 hole.
I mean, I'm just hoping this is smoke and mirrors to try to make Sammy Coates like try harder or something, because I thought Sammy Coates was a little bit closer in taking over Wheaton's job. And I mean, apparently that is not the case. I mean, Sammy Coates has been kind of a hype train this year, but with this news, I mean, he's fallen drastically. I mean, I'm not looking to touch Eli Rogers by any means, but I think Sammy Coates, unless he somehow regains his job before, like, your draft date, I wouldn't touch him until at least the last couple rounds now.
I think this makes Coates borderline undraftable. I think it solidifies Wheaton a little bit somewhere in the middle if you're pulling the trigger at like a 8th round, 7th, 8th round pick for him.
I mean, I'm not a believer in the talent of Marcus Wheaton. But if he's going to be getting all them second wide, if he's going to get the second most targets on the Pittsburgh Steelers, I mean, there's value to be had there for sure.
All right, let's go to the studs here. First,
Kick 'em off with some studs.
kick it off easily. A top 3 overall pick in any format, PPR or standard. This guy's just an animal.
And I know people already know Julio Jones is like straight dominant, but I'm going to tell you how ridiculously dominant this guy really is. He averaged 23.4 fantasy points in PPR a game last year, with only one game in single digits. I mean, that's ridiculous. He had 1,871 yards, 203 targets, and he turned 136 of those targets into receptions. I mean, he only had 8 touchdowns, and I guess the only thing you can really rag on the guy about at all is that half his touchdowns came from weeks 1 through 3. But
it was crazy. It's half of the games this year. 8 games. He was over 135 yards.
8 games, half of the season.
Those are gaudy yard numbers. 135, half the games.
That is crazy. And he had 12 games over 90 yards. So even if he wasn't scoring all those touchdowns after week 3, those catches and those receptions and those yards were there for you all year long. It's crazy. He was just producing out there. It's like, and I don't think the weapons around me. I don't think targets are going away from this guy.
I mean, the second best option for receptions is probably Freeman.
Oh, yeah. And I know they brought in Mohamed Sanu, but I am not a Mohamed Sanu believer in the slightest. I don't think I don't even know if he's better than the corpse of Roddy White was last year. I think, Jacob Tamme was probably 3rd on that team last year in, like, receptions? Like, that's bad news.
Yeah, I love him. I think it would not surprise me if his touchdowns go up. We could be talking putting right up there numbers with Antonio Brown. That's all he's lacking at this point is touchdowns.
If he goes up 3 or 4 touchdowns, 11 or 12, he was at 375 fantasy points last year. That's talking about putting him over 400 fantasy points. That's godlike territory in PPR realms. He's ascending to God form at that point. That's crazy. He's my number 2 guy. There's Antonio, there's Julio, and then there's Odell Beckham Jr. But I think Julio is I think Julio...
And especially PPR, too, because Odell didn't quite get 100 catches, but this guy in 130, almost 140 balls.
I don't think those catches and yards are necessarily going anywhere.
No. I love it. Another receiver here. People are saying they're kind of down about him, say had a down year last year. But Mike Evans, if you look at his numbers from his rookie year to his sophomore year, his receptions went up, his yards went up. The only thing that dipped was touchdowns, went from 12 to 3.
And I mean, the guy had 48 targets with missing a little bit of action here. But he only caught 74 balls. I mean, that's only a 50% catch rate. I mean, that is not very good. But he was dealing with a rookie quarterback. And I think Winston, I mean, he's definitely going to get better in his sophomore year. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I think if you can put those touchdowns from 3 to 8, and somehow his catch percentage goes from 50 to 60%, I mean, with those targets, he's looking at 90 balls and over 1,450 yards on the season. I mean, that's putting him close to 300 fantasy points.
And that's not unheard of at all. I mean, that's not crazy one bit.
I mean, that is not unreasonable. I mean, his targets could go up, actually. I don't see why not. I mean, VJax isn't getting younger and better out there by any means. I mean, the second most threat for receptions on this team is probably Charles Sims. And I mean, he's not even on the field every down. So
yeah, 12 touchdowns his rookie year. I think he can be 10, 11 again this year. We're just throwing a ballpark 7 to 8 touchdowns, and he's flirting with 300 fantasy points.
I mean, only
6 other receivers hit 300
only
fantasy
6
points.
I mean, that's putting him in elite territory. I mean, he's talking about being a top 5 or 6 wide receiver. If he can just get that catch rate to go up a little bit, I mean, I don't think that's crazy to assume.
And he's going late second with as much upside as any guy out there, I think.
He's going like 10th to 12th wide receiver off the board right now? And I mean, he could return top 5 value. I think the opportunity is there. He just got to get those drops under control. And, you know, the little wild throws by Winston, they'll probably deplete this year, probably be more on target. And, I mean, 50 to 60% is not a drastic increase by any means.
I think he's going to full-blown break out. I think next year we can be talking about this guy being a mid to late first-round pick, and I don't think that would be insane.
I mean, he's got the physical stature to be a red zone threat. I mean, the 3 touchdowns, I think, is just fluky.
I do, too.
Fluky at best.
I can't see him being down in the 3 range at all. I would expect him to have at least 8 or 9. I think he could.
I think his floor. I'd put his floor at 7. You know what I'm saying? I mean 3. I mean, jeez. I don't think there's any way the guy has under 5 this year. That's just ridiculous. And I got another stud here. You're trying to tell me, you know, Cam Newton's probably the quarterback stud coming out of the NFC South, but I'm telling you, it's Drew Brees, people. And these numbers are crazy. Drew Brees hasn't thrown for under 4,300 yards since 2005. I mean, that's remarkable. And he had four of those years were over 5,000 yards. My goodness.
and he's not just throwing yards, touchdowns too. He's had 32 or better since 2007.
Since 2007.
It's been practically a decade since his last time going under 32 touchdowns.
He had 10 or more 300-yard games in 4 of the last 5 seasons. I mean, that's boss hogging. I mean, this guy, I know he's getting a little bit old, but I think his weapons are getting better even. I mean,
you look at, they drafted Thomas. Cooks is getting better.
They brought in Colby Fleener, and I know Colby Fleener is a Fabio-looking guy, you know, didn't really do much with the Colts, but Drew Brees makes tight ends good. Look what he did for old man Ben Watson. Dug him up.
35 years old, and this guy's put up over 70 catches, 800 yards.
Reanimated the corpse of Ben Watson for 74 catches.
And if he can do that, you cannot tell me.
Drew Brees is a necromancer.
You cannot tell me that Colby Fleener is less athletic than Ben Watson. I mean, that's just crazy.
That's just crazy. To think Colby Fleener can't go out there and at least do as good as Ben Watson does is blindness. I mean, I'm saying there's no way. I think Colby Fleener, I think he could be a top 5 tight end this year. I mean, Drew Brees just makes tight ends happen.
Even if you even look at Jimmy Graham, he
you
had more athleticism, but still, he was
maybe Drew Brees made Jimmy Graham because he did not look like the same player in Seattle at all. Even before the injury, he looked sluggish. He wasn't even really getting open. They weren't designing plays for him like Drew Brees was, but I mean, my goodness. I mean, we questioned why they got rid of him. Maybe they knew more than we did. Maybe they knew Drew Brees made this guy a special player. Maybe they didn't want to pay him because Drew Brees can just next man up you with a Ben Watson or a Colby Fleener and do almost as good.
When they first brought Fleener in, they're talking Drew Brees was looking at film, and they said this guy was wide open every single play. And we already know how much he loves his tight ends. I think Fleener's going to have career year so far.
Oh, definitely. Career year is not a hard thing to overcome for Colby Fleener. But I think you can write him down for his best year of his career. Easy. If he stays healthy, there's no damn way. There's no damn way he don't beat his career marks.
All right, bums.
Bums kicking off with them bums. You always got to talk about bums just to make sure you don't draft them, people. We got to prevent you from the bums. And this first bum we're preventing you from is a heavy bum. And I think, you're telling me word, you're saying to me, J. Stu, word. I mean, you're talking J. Stu in the fifth.
He's not that bad, right?
I mean, he's at least a low-end RB2 word. I mean, isn't he? And I'm saying no. He's had 1,000-yard rushing season and is in his 8-year career. I mean, my goodness. He had 21 touchdowns in his first 2 years. And he's only had 21 touchdowns in his next 6 years after that.
Combined. Averaging 3 to 4 touchdowns a season.
3.5 touchdowns a year since his first 2 years in the league. That's ridiculously bad.
And Cam Newton's already taking away a lot of his red zone carries down in the goal line there.
And he's only had 1 year in his career over 25 receptions. I mean, that's not getting it done in PPR by any means. I mean, I think this guy's, I don't know, people just get carried away with the Carolina Panthers. It's a pretty good offense, He's going to be on the field. He's got to do something. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, Cam Newton's taking those goal line carries, and apparently he's not catching the ball at all. So, I mean, where's the value here? Like, you're getting rush yards without touchdowns, like the end. I mean, I don't think this guy's running back to territory whatsoever. I'd draft dudes taking 2-3 rounds after him before this guy.
Let's look at about where he's going here. Let's see, where are you at, J. Stu?
I'm breaking out the golden shovel on J. Stu here. Like, we're burying him.
J. Stu, he's going kind of late 5th to mid 6th. I'm taking a Jeremy Hill over him. I mean, honestly, Melvin Gordon's going in the 7th.
I'd take the upside of Melvin Gordon over him all day.
I would wait around and take Melvin Gordon over him. We don't know what Melvin Gordon can do. It's got to be better than last year. We know that much.
I think we know what J. Stu is here, people.
But J. Stu, like last 6 years, this is crazy.
1,000-yard season on his career. I mean, my goodness. That's terrible.
All right, let's look at some other bums. Let's go to another quarterback talking about here.
Bringing some Matt Ryan, and I'd be hating on Matt Ryan. But I'm about to tell you why everything I say about hating Matt Ryan is totally legit. Because Matt Ryan only had 1 week last year in which he threw 3 touchdowns. And he had 10 games? 10 of the 16 games? Are you ready? With 1 touchdown or less. Like, that's puke garbage.
That's 2/3 of the season.
Like,
he's giving you 1 at max.
I mean, he had 4,500 yards, but whatever. I mean, yardage isn't getting it done for you. I mean, 10 games with only 1 touchdown? That's unsavory. And he had Julio Jones. He's the only quarterback that gets outscored by the guy he's thrown it to on an almost weekly basis. And that's not playing around. Like, that's real talk, people. Like, that's serious business.
A lot of fantasy leagues don't reward yards. Most of them are kind of every 25 yards. So you got to be pretty heavy in your touchdowns. In his career of 8 years, he's only had 1 season over 30.
1. And it isn't like the guy hasn't had weapons to throw to. Like, his whole career, like, he had Julio Jones and Roddy White in his prime alongside Julio Jones. I'm like, this guy had the best 2 wide receiver combo in arguably the entire league for a few years. And he only could give you 1 30-touchdown season?
When we were just talking about Drew Brees, who has not had less than 32 since the year before Ryan even came into the league.
I mean, Matt Ryan, in my eyes, like, I'd rather take a flyer on these later cards. Give me Jameis Winston over Matt Ryan right now.
Give me Tyrod Taylor.
Give me right now.
Fitzpatrick.
At least Tyrod Taylor has rushing options. Matt Ryan ain't running anywhere.
All right, risers here. I'm saying I'm going to say Brandon Cooks here. He came on very strong late in the season.
Very strong, very strong. I mean, I know he's going mid to late second now, so he has risen pretty far. But he only averaged 10 points in his first 4 games last year, and people are like, "Ah, man, I drafted this guy expecting, Drew Brees. He's going to be Drew Brees' man. He's going to be something for me. He's kind of letting me down." But if you didn't fall off the shelf, if you held on to him and didn't trade him, like, this guy paid it off for you. From weeks 5 to 16, he averaged almost 19 fantasy points a week for you. And I mean, he only had 1 touchdown. 1 touchdown, weeks 1 through 7. How many did he have after that, Travis? Because it wasn't 1 touchdown, I'll tell you that.
I don't know, what do you have, 8 after that?
8 touchdowns from weeks 8 through 16. And only 1 from weeks 1 through 7. I mean, if that's not turning it on.
Second half of the season, he was a legitimate Tier 1 receiver for you. He was low-end Tier 1.
I mean, if you had him in there, your wide receiver 2, or somehow your flex in the 7th part of the season, you were just destroying people. I mean, people fell off this guy after the first 4 weeks. They're like, "Ah, man, he's just a little guy. He can't get in the end zone to save his life." And then, boom! He saved your career. He saved your whole season out there. He probably helped you win titles out there.
I think it's only going to get better this year. The more chemistry that those two build up, I think he's going to be another guy. He's going to be a late second round pick who's going to have top 10 upside to him. Anytime you're the number 1 guy for Drew Brees, you have to expect a big year. The guy, like we just said, he's crazy numbers. Over 4,400 yards.
I mean, I know Drew Brees likes to spread the ball around a lot, but you see that dime he dropped on? I mean, just like I was talking about that Tyler Lockett dime in the last podcast, this was also a dime down the sideline. And I mean, Brandon Cooks looked like the sexy boy. I mean, if he can keep building on the second half, watch out there. I mean, this guy could go off the chain. He could return top 10 wide receiver to you easy. And I mean, I don't know if he can bust into that top 5 for you.
I think top 5 would be pretty stiff.
I mean, that's pretty stiff for a guy like that. But I mean, top 10? I mean, where's he getting? I mean, he's getting drafted, tail into the second here? Maybe early third sometimes if you get lucky?
He's going around Alshon Jeffrey.
I mean, Alshon, I think, has got a higher ceiling, but he just can't stay healthy with them soft tissues. So, I mean, I think you go Cooks over him there. I mean, he's going just a spot ahead of him, but I think that's justified.
Around Demaryius Thomas range, which again, he got Sanchez throwing the ball.
Yeah, I mean, you got to take Drew Brees over Sanchez. I mean, Demaryius Thomas might have a... Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, okay. So, you got to take Drew Brees over Sanchez. I'm losing my mind out there. Demaryius Thomas is probably going to get more targets than Brandon Cooks, but I think the yards and the touchdowns will be there for Cooks way more easily with a Drew Brees throwing him the ball than a Mark Sanchez.
And he's also right next to Amari Cooper. For me, I feel like that is really tough.
That's a push.
I feel like that is really hard.
That's a solid push. I mean, I know...
Last year, Cooper as a rookie had a very, very good year, but the guy played hurt most of the season.
I mean, Derek Carr's up and coming too, and...
I think they're both going to have excellent years. I think, for me personally, out of those two guys, it's who you love more, personally.
It is who you love more. I think that's as close to a push as it's going to get. And I mean, I guess you can say Cooper's ceiling is just a little bit higher. I mean, if you really want to break it down.
Just to see, because he's the more athletic kind of wide receiver 1 build.
But he's got a little case of the dropsies, too. I mean, he's got a little case of the dropsies. And I mean, the Raiders are decent, but they're no offensive power of the New Orleans Saints.
I mean, Derek Carr is getting better, but he's not no Drew Brees.
I mean, I don't think you can write Derek Carr down for 30 touchdowns this year, but you can definitely write Drew Brees down for that.
I like Cooks ahead of Cooper this much just for the sake of I trust Brees a lot more than I do Carr.
It's a push. It's a who do I like the cut of the jib more. It's like, which guy's cut of the jib do I really like more? Because... I mean, I can't give you a solid answer on that. I
think that's as close as it gets, really.
Yeah.
Let's talk about another riser.
We got Cam Newton. Now, some people, I mean, a guy in one of our leagues last year got Cam Newton off the waiver wire. I mean, that made me feel like an idiot. I mean, he got to the champion. I mean, he didn't win the dance, but he got to the championship game on the shoulders of Cam Newton that he found off the waiver wire. I mean, Cam Newton was the #1 fantasy quarterback last year for him.
And we talked about earlier, he's getting rushing yards, he's getting rushing touchdowns. So even if he's not lighting up in throwing stats, he's at least got a very, very high floor every week. Just because he gives you that extra, 5 to 10 points in rushing stats.
I mean, the only thing I can say it's a little bit unsavory about him is he's going first quarterback off the board, and that's like third-round average draft position. And, I mean, I hate taking quarterbacks in the third round. There's way too much talent there at the running back wide receiver position in the third round to think about taking quarterbacks in my eyes.
If you're looking at the value around him, a Julian Edelman, a Jarvis Landry, even a Kelvin Benjamin, a Golden Tate, Jeremy Maclin, they're all kind of shoved into that late third round, maybe sneak out to the early fourth. But I think if you can sew up one of those receivers, be like your third receiver on your team, and then you can wait a little bit.
I mean, quarterback was so deep. I mean, the reason why Cam Newton was winning people's leagues last year is because he was either drafted late or picked off the waivers, like I said. I mean, people weren't drafting him in the third last year and having him win leagues. I mean, I don't think that's how you do it. I think you got to get that guy that's a little bit off that shelf that turns into the top 3 quarterback for you to win your leagues.
Yeah, I've never been big on drafting quarterbacks early, just because you look at these dudes.
I hate being the first team to draft a quarterback. That makes me feel sick.
If you look at this, you can sew up your third receiver, and you can still get like a Drew Brees 3 rounds later, who you know is going to put up numbers. I just don't see the hype train of drafting a Cam Newton in the third when there's so much better value at other positions.
And Cam Newton seems to only be awesome every other season. I mean, I know his weapons are getting better because Funches is probably learning the system more, getting a little more affiliated with how the NFL goes down here, and Kelvin Benjamin's coming off injury. But, Ted Ginn did perform for him last year. It wasn't like he didn't have
touchdowns.
It wasn't like he didn't have a wide receiver out there catching touchdowns. I mean, Ted Ginn was somehow that guy. So you say, what? Is one of these other dudes, Benjamin or Funches, has got to at least get you 10 touchdowns to replace what Ted Ginn did? And, I mean, that's not an easy thing to do.
No, and I think Olsen has had 3 career years in a row. At some point, this guy's got to start, plateauing a little bit.
I mean, I like Greg Olsen, but
you can solidify Olsen as top 5, probably top 3 tight end.
I mean, he was a top 5. He was a number 5 tight end last year. But I mean, 7 touchdowns is good. But I mean, that receiving core was so bad. I mean, he got outscored on the same team by Ted Ginn. I mean, 7 touchdowns is good, but when the whole receiving core is basically not even on the field, and your best option, I mean, if he can't get more than 7 touchdowns in that kind of opportunity, I don't see how he can get up to 10 touchdowns with Kelvin Benjamin and Devin Funches on the field.
Let's talk about some fallers here.
Fallers.
Get some arrows going here.
Oh,
we're leaving the bum skis up there.
I'm leaving the bums. I'm leaving them up there, people. I'm falling off. I'm sorry. But I got the fallers down there.
Now, I have never seen this situation, but we're having the number 1 running back last year be a third or back end of the second to a pick here. We're talking late second, early third, the number 1 back. I've never seen that happen.
I mean, the guy did average 21.5 fantasy points last year, but almost half of his fantasy points came from 4 games.
Devontae Freeman was just LaDainian Tomlinson in a 4-game stretch, but other than that, he was pretty pedestrian. He had a lot of weeks where his catches saved him, I feel like.
I mean, he only had 4 games with over 100 yards rushing. I mean, that's not super stud material at all. I mean, if it wasn't for these catches and these touchdowns, I know, and he was the number 1 running back in a year when running back position was just depleted to the depths. Like, there was jabronis out there. Like, the number 5 running back was Doug Martin, and he only scored 234 fantasy points. I mean, that is not very good.
And Danny Woodhead was a top 5 back. That's insane.
I mean, I think Freeman does do for you. If he can keep catching these balls, I mean, he did have 8 games with 5 catches or more last year, and 12 games where he had 3 catches or more. I mean, that's very good.
He had a 10-catch game in there.
But he's going to need to keep jumping these balls because he's not getting that yards per carry. He's barely at 4 yards a carry on the season last year. He barely cracked 1,000 yards. I mean, barely cracking 1,000 yards for the number 1 fantasy running back? And that's not usually how it goes.
And I don't think his touchdown is going to stay where it's at. I think that's just unheard of. And another thing is he missed the game. I think it was, a concussion last year?
He got a little concussion, missed one game. Against the Vikings, he missed that game.
Tevin Coleman could flip the script on him like he did last year.
Like we said before in the other podcast, this opportunity for Tevin Coleman to be this year's Devontae Freeman. I know Devontae Freeman still looked pretty stellar in the preseason, though. He got a decent rushing touchdown the other day. But he's that guy. I mean, once defenses learned that, they were like afraid. They were like afraid to let him go outside. So all he was doing was cutting back against the grain and slicing him back up the middle. Once they learned to contain him and make him string him out toward the sideline, his yards per carry production dipped drastically in the second half of the year once defenses figured out how to play this guy.
Yeah, and he's, like I've said, I have never seen normally the number 1 fantasy back, you can cement him in high end first round.
This is crazy. You finished number 1 fantasy back, and he's going off the board at the 6th or 7th running back?
He's going
8th running back off the board.
Behind Charles, behind Le'Veon Bell, behind Elliott Miller. And then you're looking at Gurley.
Adrian Peterson, David Johnson. He's going behind all those guys. And Le'Veon Bell's missing 3 games, but I'm taking Le'Veon Bell over him every day of the week. That's for sure.
I think Freeman's ceiling has already happened. I don't think he can't get any better than what he did.
That happened.
That stretch there where he's over 30 points, that's just insane. That will never happen again in Freeman's career.
But if you're looking to get your RB1 at somehow and he's sneaking into the end of the third and you got 2 wide receivers already, that's pretty savory in my eyes. That's a good value.
I think you do have to sew up Coleman, though, if that's the case. Coleman, and it's not like you have to overpay for him at all. Coleman's going late. He's like anywhere from 8th to 10th round here.
Yeah, you can sew up that backfield relatively easy. And if you can package him in as your RB1 behind 2 stud wide receivers somehow, I think that's the path. I'm not hating on him, but I'm not saying what he can do last year. But I think he can keep the catches going. I think Coleman's going to rip into his rushing yards a little bit, but if he can somehow even get close to those touchdowns, I think you can write him down for top 10 back easy for sure.
It's borderline for me. I don't even.
I'm afraid of the guy. Yeah.
I don't even think I love him as much as you kind of like him. I would not be shocked if he was outside of top 15 backs. He scares me to death. I think he's a 1-year wonder. This is a guy last year. He was drafted where, mid-teens? Somewhere. He was a 13th round pick.
Yeah, he was going. He was basically he was completely off my radar last year, people. I didn't like anybody in the Falcon backfield at all, but he was completely off my radar, and that just killed me.
I'm scared to death of him.
I think he won your leagues last year, and that's it. But that might be done. I'd take LaShawn McCoy after him, and he's going about 6 or 7 spots later.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the second round backs.
I'm taking him over Cheeseburger Eddie. That's happening. I'm not that crazy.
I'm taking him over Doug Martin.
I'll take him over Doug Martin, but I am not taking him over Charles or McCoy.
No, those guys, Charles and McCoy, if they're healthy, they're on the field, they could be top 5 backs easy. In PPR.
And I think Devontae Freeman and Mark Ingram are kind of the same guy, as far as value goes.
You wanna like him, but then you look at it and you dig into it a little bit.
Like
Ingram
I said,
can't stay on the field. Freeman, he's got to be a one-hit wonder.
Almost half of his fantasy points came from 4 football games. That's pretty rough. that's a bad average. I mean, you got a heavy average in those 4 games, but you got a really low average in those other 12 football or 11 football games because he missed against the Vikings.
He was really touchdown dependent toward the end of the year.
I mean, just making 4 yards a carry. I mean, that's by no means super stud running back material.
No.
I mean, Doug Martin, who I don't even like, had like 4.9. I don't even like him.
All right, let's talk about some value guys here. Get the values up there.
Let's hit you with some Charles Sims. Now, if you're taking Doug Martin, I mean, in the mid-third, I think you got to sew up Charles Sims here. I mean, he's going in the 8th or 9th round. He caught over 50 balls last year. He had 18 more catches than Doug. And, I mean, he had the same yards per carry as Doug, too. And, I mean, that's pretty sexy in my eyes. I mean, I know he had less totes, but getting the same yards per carry, I mean, if Doug goes down and you got both these guys, I think Charles Sims does better than any of them did by themselves. I mean, together.
Yeah, I think Sims, if Doug goes down, I think he's RB1. I think even with Doug Martin in the lineup, if you're struggling and you need to throw in an RB2 or a flex player, I think you can expect double digits.
I think he'll return low-tier RB2 for you, even with Dougie on the field.
This is a classic example where I'm not viewing it as a handcuff either because it's not like a Spencer Ware or whatever where he's not going to see the field unless Charles goes down. But he's a guy who is going to get in the game and he can return value.
Oh, he plays football. I mean, if the Buccaneers are somehow behind in games, Charles Sims is on the field the whole time. I mean, if they're down 2 or 3 scores, Charles Sims is on the field the whole time. And I mean, as far as like football talent goes, I'm not convinced that Charles Sims isn't more talented than Doug Martin personally.
I think Doug Martin having it be in his contract year had a big part in it. Now that he's paid, I don't know, it could be a little washy. I think Sims, especially for you're getting him somewhere between like 9th, 10th round, he's right in the Tevin Coleman area. I think both those guys are great backfields that you can draft and sew them up.
I mean, let's talk about Doug Martin a little bit here and why we like Charles Sims. You know, I like Charles Sims a little bit more than Doug Martin. I mean, yeah, Doug Martin was a top 5 fantasy back last year. And, I mean, he's going around, I mean, even Lacey's going ahead of him, and people are showing him, like, zero respect. But I think there's reasons for this. I mean, my goodness. In 8 games last year, which is half of the season, he scored less than 11 fantasy points in PPR.
That's bad.
That's bad.
That's really bad.
That is not RB1, like talk at all. I mean, I know he was the RB5, but he only had 237 points to do it. I mean, that's not super studly. And a regular RB, that's barely scrapping top 10. And I mean, besides the terrible RB season that was last year, like you look up any RB seasons for the 3 or 4 years before that, those points are barely scraping top 10.
And he's another guy I think has a very limited ceiling with Sims there.
I mean, he only had 3 games last year with 20 points or more in PPR or better. Now, we're talking about that golden shovel. We're going to bust out that golden shovel on Doug Martin right now. Because you know who also had 3 games with over 20 points? We're talking guys like Kendrick West. We're talking James Starks had 3 games with 20 points or more. Oh my God, Danny Woodhead had 4 points with 4 games with 20 points or more. I know Danny Woodhead was a swan song too, but I mean, James Starks and Kendrick West have the same amount of 20-point games as you?
How many catches did Doug Martin have? 20-something?
33.
33.
33 catches. That's just barely over 2 catches a game. I mean, that's not sexy, boy. And they're talking about Charles. I mean, I think Charles Sims is going to eat into those catches even more.
Another value guy here. I think we hit on him a little bit earlier. Colby Fleener, people. If Ben Watson can do it, Colby Fleener can do it better.
There's no reason why he can't. I mean, Ben Watson had 74 catches last year. I mean, they reanimated his corpse. Drew Brees is a borderline necromancer. I mean, Ben Watson's 35 years old. And apparently Drew Brees made Jimmy Graham better than what he actually is, too. Because Jimmy
saw him in Seattle.
Yeah, you had seen what he did in Seattle even before the injury, and that was borderline gross.
I think Fleener,
I think he has top 5 potential.
He's getting drafted like anywhere from like the 7th to 10th best tight end off the board. I think you can count on him for top 5. I think you really can. I think he can sneak in there.
I mean, if they can get him the ball as many times as they did Watson.
Oh yeah, if he gets the targets that Watson gets, I mean, I think he's got 1,000 yards in him, 80 balls.
I mean, he's a Fabio-looking guy, but
didn't he cut his hair?
Did he?
I think he did. He's not as ugly anymore.
Oh baby, watch out!
I think. We'll see.
He's streamlining out there, cutting off the hair, getting a little more speed. It's game on.
Is that it here?
Yeah, I think so. I think that about wraps it up for today's show.
All right. Thanks again for watching. Make sure you subscribe.
Like and comment below. We appreciate it very much.
Email us your questions, tankersfantasyfootball@gmail.com. Thanks a bunch for watching. We'll catch you later.
Catch you later.